And welcome. Today I'm going to take a look at the toolbar tools in Inkscape, give you kind of an initial rundown of some of the ones that we use a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Inkscape, and I don't know if yours looks like this when it launches, but mine always kind of throws this page up in the corner and then goes full screen. So this is going to be your initial workspace rather, and it'll always default to a standard letter sized document workspace. And you have workspace out here. You can move objects out here and then move them around and put them inside the document for export or whatever you want to do. Over here you'll have a series of palettes, things like layers and your fill and stroke for coloring objects, and there are all kinds of options that you can use, and that's this set of toolbars over here. We'll look at some of those later, but today we want to focus on the tools over here on the left hand side. These are basically all your object manipulation and creation tools. So to do that, I'm going to open a file that's a little character called Vexstrips, and he's like what I call a character kit. So basically all of the components that we would have to create a character. So we'll use this document for this little lesson about the toolbar. So your first tool and your most important one, you're going to use this all the time, is your select and transform objects. Basically the arrow tool. So you select that, then you can move your any given object around. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and create a view. We'll go ahead and create just an upper torso character of Vexstrips, and while we're doing that, then we can show some of the way these tools work. So this arrow key, that's primary. So that's, you'll select an object. So I already have a basic head built. So this is actually 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 5 components of a head, and then I've grouped them together so that they behave as a singular object. So we're going to go ahead and select this, and I'm going to do a Control V and create a copy of that, just so I don't do any kind of a destructive edit or anything like that. I'll keep my basic kit intact. So we're going to do Rex's head. So when you look at your object options, when you have the arrow tool selected, you have scaling, up and down, left and right, and then you can also, in any selected object, you can do a second select and that second click with that arrow key, and it'll give you the option to rotate. And then this is pretty cool. It gives you kind of the option to skew along the top, bottom, upper right, and you can kind of get some variation in your shapes that way if you're reusing objects. That way you can kind of add a little variety into just a composition, so that all of your, even though you're doing a lot of copy paste and reusing of objects, you're not getting it's not quite so homogeneous. You can add a little variety to them. So let's grab a pair of eyes, and here's another thing I can show you. Basically all your objects are going to stack basically in the order that they were placed into the document. So to move things up and down, it's really simple in Inkscape. You can just use your page up, page down keys, page up, page down, page up, page down, to stack things. And that's really helpful to place things where you want them. So we'll give Rex some eyes. We'll borrow some eyebrows, and we'll give Rex a nice smile today. So that's all just Control, copy, paste, and then we'll throw a pair of, oops, I want to copy paste these. Those are the eyeballs I have set up for the 3/4 view. There we go. So now we have Rex's head. So now here's where your arrow tool will become very useful. You can just lasso around an entire object. It'll select everything, and then you can go into Object and Group. And so now I can just move that whole group of objects around as a single object, so that I can go ahead and compose then the rest of the character. So we'll grab a torso here. We'll copy paste that. Oh, and then we'll want to page down again. on that selected object. And that'll give us, move his head a little bit to the back. We'll grab these arm pieces. We'll copy all those. Oops. Grab this guy from the bottom. Anytime you hold Shift or Control when you click with the arrow key, that will also select multiple things. So if I want to select them, I can hold down Shift, and then I can move them around as a singular object. Or I can move the individual pieces. So what we do with this tool, then we want to bring the sleeve up because that's obviously going to be the top, and then we want the forearm obviously to be the forearm. And so then here's another thing, the zoom tool. You can lasso around any object and it'll zoom in for you. If you have a mouse wheel, a wheel mouse, you can scroll up and down, and then of course scroll around to navigate and get better look at your workspace. So let's say we don't like that sleeve though. Say we want to make that sleeve, say we want Rex to be wearing red today. So we're going to move from the Select and Transform tool to the Edit Paths tool. And I use this as a trick. I'm not going to actually edit the path. The path editing is a little more, well, I'll just show you. So whenever you select with the Edit Path tool, it shows you the points and the control handles. So you'll get these, let's zoom in on that so you can get a better look at it. You select the point and you get a control handle, and then you can manipulate and change the curves in an object, or move things around. So again, this is another way you can get some variety. But in a grouped object, say Rex's head, say we want to give him different eyebrows, I can go in even while he's grouped, and I can say make his eyebrows a little darker or brown, and the direct selection or the path tool will let me select even though it's within the group. So once I click away, still in the group, but I was able to go in and select specific components of a group and recolor them. So that's really, really useful. So let's go ahead and put this arm together now. So we've got Rex's eyebrows fixed. So now we're going to go ahead and build his arm. So again, Shift, Select, and then we'll go to Object, Group. And you can also do Control G, which is in a lot of software packages that have a group function. Control G will be your group tool. So then we'll grab the forearm, we'll put that on there. So now here's another thing that's really useful in terms of the kind of work we're doing, and you want to do, you're doing character posing. So we have this group, and if you see this little cross right here in the center, that's the rotation point. So if I rotate there, then it makes it kind of hard to pose the character, but you can always you can select with that arrow tool, you can select that rotation cross, and it will then rotate the object based on that. So you can create a shoulder joint, and then you can do the same thing with here, which I've already done that in my character kit for Rex. So you can rotate that around, and it makes posing a character much easier. And then okay, so now we've done that. So now we've got an arm. So let's do a second arm, and we're just going to use the same arm in the same place, and again, it's gonna put that anchor in the center. And what we're going to actually do here is flip. So you can do Object, where is it? Flip horizontal. And one of the great things about Inkscape is that you can flip. So like say you have a left hand or something that you've drawn, you can use the H key, like I'm doing now, to flip an object horizontally and put it on another axis, which is really easy. So then here we'll use our page up, page down. So we want to page that back to the back side of the thing there, his body, and then Now we have kind of an upper torso built of Rex today. I don't have any hands in this kit, so I won't use that necessarily as an example. So those are kind of three biggies that what you will use is that direct selection, that path selection, your magnifying glass, your zoom tool, and then another good one is the paint bucket. You'll use that one all the time for coloring, especially if you're doing, let's say Rex has been up all night. So we want to, whoops, that's a Control Z. We don't want to do that. We want to give Rex red eyes. Say, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. So you just use your paint bucket, and then we're like, oh well, that color I don't like that. Let's see, we can that's too pink. There we go. And so paint bucket works pretty much like the way you would expect paint bucket to work in other things like MS Paint or Photoshop or any of that. It basically fills an area. This fill is apparently adding a black stroke to it. We'll work with stroke and fill and some of those things a little later. But paint bucket's very simple. And in Inkscape, it creates an entirely new object. So your original color stays, and then you have the second object. So say we wanted to make a second shirt for him, or I don't know, for some reason maybe in this comic he's going to be wearing a longer pink shirt. So we could go to our point selection tool, and then we can drag individual points in the artwork, or you can lasso them and drag them. So now he's kind of wearing, like a pink apron or something. Another good keyboard shortcut is the number 5. It will actually fill the document workspace to your page. Of course, we're working off page, so we're kind of have to scroll over a little bit, but that's okay. So we can zoom in. So paint bucket, we don't really like that. We want his apron to be the same color as his shirt. So you have your eyedropper. Eyedropper is another one. So you can just select an object and go to your eyedropper and select any color, and then it will automatically change that fill to that new color. So it's very useful for matching color. Say you have a character you've downloaded and you want to match all the colors for something you're doing, or you're trying to rebuild the clothes or whatever. You can use that eyedropper to match colors really, really quickly. Let's see, what else do we have here? You have your basic object creation. So this is your rectangle tool, and another cool thing in Inkscape is you have these control handles, so you can actually make a rounded rectangle, and this little control slider dot will create the roundness of the corner. I use that for making word balloons, actually. And in Inkscape, a rectangle, a circle does a similar thing. You can actually make like pie slices, things of that nature. And it creates circles and rectangles and also geometric shapes as their own objects. So it's like if you were to go to point selection, you're not going to see a point here, a point here, a point here, a point here, defining every angle. It's defined as a star object or as a circle object. So you can go to your path menu and create object to path. So now when we go to our point selection tool, you have that. Say you want to make a little, I don't know, for some reason you want your star to be a little janky and look like maybe a little kid or something like that. So you can go in and turn that object into a series of paths, and then you can manipulate those. So that's how I do like a word balloon. So for example, I would double click there with the selection tool to get that control handle back. Then I kind of get the roundness I want for my word balloon. I go to object to path. Now it's got control points. So using the point selection tool, then you can click on any path to add a point like I did here, and then you do the same, and then I can just drag down, and now I have a pretty good word balloon shape. Now in Inkscape, dealing with curves like Bezier curves, they can be really tricky if you're not used to using them. They're kind of a counterintuitive type of drawing. so you have these weird control handles, but they'll match up. So like this control handle here, which I'm not pulling on, you see how it kind of is affected by the shape of that. And then you can also, you can grab a straight line and you can just drag it, and then it will create control handles. So like, say we want to get Rex's word balloon pointing up to his mouth, you can kind of play with the control handles and get the tail of the word balloon to point to his head. Let's hit 5 again to get that zoom out to the full thing, the full view. And so then, oh, okay, well this isn't working. A green word balloon's no good, so let's find some white. So there we go. And then we can adjust the thickness of the stroke outside the word balloon. But I use that path editing tool, that point selection tool, to create word balloons really quickly. And you can use it to adjust, and create weird shaped ones and make them look a little more organic, or merge a few shapes. Let's say you've got a big long piece of dialogue, you could put, you could merge, let's see, that's still an object. So we want to go object to path, and then again we'll make that one white. Oops. Use the eyedropper tool, make that white. Then you can multiple select, and there are ways to fuse paths union. So now you have, you could put a piece of text here, you could run it down into here and have a big long piece of dialogue. Text tool. You just draw a box, a bounding box, or you can just put a single cursor and just type to your heart's content, depending on how you want to treat it. I like the bounding box when I'm doing dialogue, because then I can I can build the bounding box inside the dimensions of my word balloon, and it all fits nicely, and it's pretty easy to organize. Down here you just have a simple pencil tool for doing kind of freehand stuff. You always kind of want to end on your starting point, so you have a nice closed path. Then you can fill it with a color. Another cool thing, like if you're doing freehand, you can select the object and look at all those points. Like there's just hundreds of them, which is kind of hard to work with if you're trying to get a specific look, because it's just a lot of control points. So there are all kinds of path tools that you can use, like Path Simplify. So there it automatically kind of simplified the path, smoothed out some of the lines, and just tossed out a bunch of the kind of redundant paths. And sometimes you'll lose a little bit of definition, so depending on what you're doing, you may not want to use Simplify, but it also makes your file sizes smaller and things like that. Those are kind of the biggies. I think you can use this to draw spirals. I'm not real good at using it, but you might be able to find some fun things to do with that. The spray can will take your last selected object and turn it into a spray paint. So like if you're doing grass or hair or something like that, you might want to, you could probably use that. Let's see what we can do with this. Maybe make it smaller and see, I don't know, into a spray. So you can draw, real easy to draw like patterns and or distributions of objects that you select. You can create a single whatever and literally spray can it all over the place. It's pretty cool. I'm not sure how that eraser tool works. I will have to look into that. Let's take one of these down here and look at him. So this is going to be good for doing like sky and lighting effects, shadow effects. This is your gradient tool. So what am I doing wrong here? I'm not sure why that's not working. Well, I'm going to do some research on the gradient tool. I don't use it a lot, to be perfectly honest. I'll get better at that, and I will do a lesson about that specifically. Oh, that must be additional gradient. Oh, that's a mesh. So a mesh in is a way of doing. It's another good way of creating shadows and lighting effects. So it will create a gradient mesh is basically what that does. And you can probably play with the gradient tool and that gradient mesh tool and get some really interesting effects. Create diagrams. That's probably for creating like flowcharts and things like that. Then you have a I like this tool a lot because it's the calligraphy tool. So it basically creates very organic, almost like paint stroke type things, and it creates them as a full object. So again, if you you select that point selection, you're going to see all those points. Then you can go into path and simplify those just to clean those up. But you can get very nice organic looking strokes. And if you have like a Wacom tablet, you can set your angle and pressure sensitivities and stuff, and you can get some very realistic looking pen strokes. Let's see, I got my Wacom tablet here all hooked up, so I can go to that calligraphy tool. So and you can see based on the pressure, you can get different really nice strokes. You can go in and you can remove the stroke from those if you just want. Let's say you just want to do a black, like you're doing an inking type thing. You want to do a character or an outfit or something that looks very much like it was hand drawn. That might be a tool that you would use for that. And then the pen tool is very similar, except it goes point to point and it gives you those control handles. So this is one of the more counterintuitive things you might run into if you're used to just even drawing in like Photoshop or something. If you have experience with Adobe Illustrator, you might be familiar with Bezier curves. But curves are really kind of tricky to work with, but you can do really cool and very precise things with them if you get proficient at using them. So that's kind of a rundown of kind of most of the basic tools that I use when drawing and doing comic stuff. So let's go back and take a look at Rex and then do a quick recap. So there's my Rex character kit. There's Rex with his freaky red eyes. Let's zoom in there. We'll get rid of those eyes. So get rid of his eyes. We want to do this selection tool and just select an object and delete it. And we don't like his dress either. So Rex looks like he's spouting a bunch of gibberish. And again, you can do rotation, and you can also, another useful thing like when you're doing heads is to put that head right at that point of the torso where the neck, whoops, we broke our group somehow. So again, you can lasso, select, and the nice thing is too, when you're using that lasso select, unless you completely select and enclose an object with your lasso, you won't add it to your selection. So like I've lassoed both sleeves and the shirt, but I haven't completely enclosed them, so it's only going to get the stuff that's completely covered. So I can do a Control G, which is the same as object group. So now I can double click, I can move that pivot down. There we go. And now his head is in a more kind of pivots in a more organic way. So if you need to have him looking up at something, and then now his sleeve is sticking out over his ear. We don't want that, so we want to go page down to get, there we go. So that's kind of a basic look at some of the tools you can use to assemble a character, a little bit of a kind of a quickie lesson in assembling some of the pieces I have for the upper torso on a character. Next time we'll probably take a look at some of the keyboard shortcuts, things like stacking and flipping objects and group, and go a little more into detail in how some of that works and some of the cool things you can get by doing that. Thanks for watching.